or afternoon. Your bell work today is to describe Greek culture during the classical period. You can find this information from the reading you should have done yesterday. Today's lesson is called Greek Philosophical Traditions and State Building. We are in the Greek and Hellenistic states in the classical Mediterranean unit. Today's lesson, specifically is going to look at the philosophers that the Greeks listened to and how their traditions actually really had an effect or a role in their state building. As we review the sources for today, let us keep our unit prompt in mind. It's why and how did the Greek traditions influence both European and Asian communities during the classical period? So we're learning about the Greek traditions, why and how did they influence European and Asian communities. As we go through the sources, just try to think back to this prompt as you learn information and see if there's anything you can apply or any answers we find. All right, so Greek philosophical traditions explained the natural and human world through reason and observation and also shaped the republican and democratic forms of city-states. So that's a long sentence just to say that these philosophers used their philosophies to explain how the world worked, and these philosophies that they came up with really did play a large role in the way that their government worked. So source one says, in Plato's The Republic, he describes several governments. So this is an excerpt from Plato the Republic, published 360 BCE and translated by Benjamin Jowett. It says, the four governments of which I spoke so far, as they have distinct names, are first, those of Crete and Sparta, which are generally applauded. What is termed oligarchy comes next. This is not equally approved and is a form of government which teems with evils. Thirdly, democracy, which naturally follows oligarchy, although very different. And lastly comes tyranny, or tyranny, great and famous, which differs from them all and is the fourth and worst disorder of a state. So what I want you to do first is just jot down your initial observations. So again, what you see, think, or wonder, or what you hear, think, or wonder. What's your perception of this source at first? Take a moment to do that. Now that you've jotted down your initial observations, let's go a little bit deeper into observe and analyze. So how does Plato describe each of the four governments? What limited descriptions does he give for each of these four? It says Plato warns in his essay that democracies lead to a government ruled by bullies and brutes, that democratic leaders are just tyrants propped up by democracy. So he's saying that in a democracy like our own, like our government, where people vote for their ruler, ultimately it just leads to a government where the ruler is a bully or a brute, and that those leaders kind of just like hide behind this disguise of democracy. So do you agree or disagree? And you have to tell me why. There is no wrong or right answer so long as you can support your answer with why. You will have a link to this video separate, so take a moment and go watch this video in Canvas. You went to Canvas and watched that other video. It was just a couple of minutes. Once you've watched that, you can answer this question. Greek philosophical traditions use reasoning and observation to explain the natural and human world. I said that at the beginning of the lesson, right? How is this video an example of this? So the video that you just watched, the other one, how does it show that philosophical traditions or philosophers use reasoning and observation to explain the natural and our human world? Take a moment to respond to that. All right, source two, again, you're going to jot down your initial observations of this source. It is a map of Alexander the Great's empire at its largest extent in 323 BCE from generic mapping tools of the Wikimedia Commons. I'm not going to go over anything else with you. I'd like you to just do your initial observations first. All right, so once you've jotted down your initial observations, here are your questions. Why would Greek philosophies spread so quickly during the classical period? Use evidence from source 2, but feel free to reference the introduction reading that we did yesterday, right? So looking at this map, why do you think philosophy spread so quickly? What obstacles would have stood in the way from allowing these philosophies to influence other cultures? Once you've done number 4 and number 5, hopefully you paused the video and did that, I just want to cover one thing quickly. The obstacles, hopefully, that you acknowledge are that there are going to be several barriers when any kind of culture is spreading, right? So we did read yesterday that they all shared a common language, but once you leave that area, there are areas where they speak other languages, right? So a language barrier is a huge obstacle. So anything cultural, right? So if they have difference in cultures and they don't get along, if there's past tensions from previous wars, but also in addition to those obstacles would be like actual physical geographic obstacles, right? So if you look on this map, for example, this desert area was probably difficult to traverse. Like if you look at the arrows, so conquest course of Alexander, they go kind of around the desert. So anything in this area would have been difficult to spread that culture with, to spread those philosophies through. Any mountain ranges if you have to go over the ocean, right? So hopefully you got a couple of those. All right, so as a reminder, our prompt claim, whatever you want to call it, asks why and how did Greek traditions influence both European and Asian communities during the classical period? So 6 and 7 ask specifically about the prompt because we want to be as prepared as we can at the end of this unit in order to answer that question using these sources. So what information can you use so far to answer this prompt? How can you use these sources? What information are we missing that would be essential to give an inclusive, like a whole answer? And that says through, but it should say thorough answer. Once you are done with these questions, you have a reading. You should be able to finish it during this class period and get those uploaded onto Canvas as an e-learner. If you are a traditional student and you are making up this work because you're absent, you will also have to upload this as an e-learner because today's grade for them was in-class participation.